Why was she so calm? That was the first thing T.S. Officer Jonathan Myers noticed about the girl. Not the backpack, not the worn canvas jacket, 2 sizes too large. Not even the absence of a suitcase. It was her eyes. Unmoving, unreadable, focused. Like she was running a checklist in her head, while the rest of the terminal shuffled, complained, spilled coffee, argued over gate changes. She didn't belong here. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't try to. A girl, maybe 17, stood in lane 3 of Reagan National Airport, holding a battered olive drab backpack like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. No phone, no earbuds, no TikTok scrolling, just that bag, patched at the corners and fraying like it had been through sandstorms. On her boarding pass, one way. Ticket to Denver, Colorado. No checked baggage, no listed guardian, no emergency contact. Myers leaned toward the monitor, already flagging the scan. His fingers hovered over the alert key, not because she looked suspicious. She didn't. But because she looked trained, rehearsed, like she had walked through this moment 100 times in her mind. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to inspect your backpack manually." She didn't flinch, didn't argue. She handed it over with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. He carried it to the secondary table, called Officer Rodriguez over, and unzipped the main pocket. No hidden compartments, no wires, a paperback novel, a spiral notebook filled with sketches and clean handwriting, a toothbrush, a charger, a folded flannel hoodie, faded photograph, an old man in uniform holding a laughing girl on his shoulders. Everything normal, almost, until he reached the bottom. He felt the weight before he saw it. Something solid, cold, buried in the liner of the back wall. He tugged. The zipper reached in and pulled out a black leather case. Rectangular, brass trim, smooth and unmarked, like it had been made to disappear. He glanced toward her, 10 feet away, standing still, hands clasped in front of her, watching, not scared, not smug, just waiting. He opened it. Inside, a medal, but not one he recognized. Bronze, darkened with age. At the center, a bald eagle. Wings spread wide, talons clutching twin lightning bolts. Above it, Latin words etched in precise serif. Fiat veritas per obscurum. Let truth be made through darkness. Below that, Department of Strategic Operations, Class Omega. He stared at it. His mouth went dry. Rodriguez leaned in. "That doesn't look fake." "It's not in any system," Myers muttered. He checked again anyway. Typed, scanned, cross-referenced. Nothing. No medal by that name existed in any registry. No record of Class Omega, but the back of the medal told a different story. Etched into the reverse side, authorized possession only in recorded duplication is a felony record ID. Redacted Myers had served. He'd seen secret clearances. He'd run ops in countries that no longer existed. But this was something else. He looked up. The girl hadn't moved. Her eyes met his. "Elena Brooks?" he said, reading from the ID clipped to her jacket. She nodded once. "I need to ask you a few more questions." Still, no protest. They took her quietly to a secondary interview room. No sirens, no raised voices. Just her and the backpack and the black case placed carefully on a metal table. The room was cold. The clock ticked loud. The air was too still. Too clean, like something sterile had invaded the story of her life. Myers stood off to the side, arms crossed. She sat with her hands in her lap, her back straight, her eyes calm. He kept expecting her to break, cry, argue, panic, but nothing came. She didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't ask for water, didn't ask if she was in trouble. She just waited. At 11:17 a.m., a woman entered the room, black suit, dark eyes, posture like a blade. Her badge read Department of Homeland Security. She sat down across from Elena and placed her hands flat on the table. "I'm Agent Lynn Barrett," she said. "Do you know why you're here?" Elena nodded. Because of the medal. Barrett watched her for a moment. "You're very calm." I knew someone would notice it eventually. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't arrogant. It wasn't bored, just resolved. Barrett opened the case, looked at the metal. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That microscopic tell that something old and buried had just risen again. She flipped the metal over, read the inscription, held her breath for half a second. Then she closed the case. Again, where did you get this? My grandfather gave it to me. When? 2 days before he died. Did he tell you what it was? No, Elena said. Just that it was important, that I needed to bring it to someone. Barrett leaned in. Who? Catherine. Mendes, Colorado Springs. Barrett blinked, but only once. The kind of blink that meant a landslide had just started behind her eyes. Myers noticed. Elena noticed. You were flying there today? Barrett asked. Elena nodded. One way, she said. He left me a savings account. I used all of it. Barrett stood. She walked out of the room without a word. In the hallway, Myers followed. You didn't tell me, she said in these. You didn't ask. Barrett's eyes burned. Catherine Mendes has been presumed dead since 1991. She was one of the original architects of Project Omega. She vanished off-grid, burned every identity. This girl? Just name-dropped her like she was ordering coffee. So what now? Barrett exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that tasted like ash and memory. Now I make a phone call I was told I'd never make. Inside, Elena sat in silence. She didn't reach for the case, didn't glance toward the door. Her grandfather's voice played quietly in her head. Not words, not instructions, just the weight behind the way he'd looked at her that last night, the way he handed her. The case, the things he didn't say. She thought she understood him now. She wasn't just carrying a medal. She was carrying a key, and someone, somewhere, had just realized the lock was still alive. She stood alone in the cold, neutral room. But what came next, no one expected. The door reopened exactly 16 minutes later. This time, Agent Lynn Barrett didn't come alone. The man who entered behind her carried the weight of secrets. Like armor, mid-50s, cropped hair, quiet eyes. The kind that didn't scan a room, they read it. Line by line, he didn't introduce himself. Didn't need to. He sat down across from Elena, folding his hands in the exact center of the table. Like the placement meant something, Elena Brooks, he said calmly. May I see the medal? She looked at the case. Then back at him, she nodded. He opened it like it was a sacred object. No urgency, no fear, just a quiet ritual. As his eyes fell on the medal, something in his breath caught, not visible, not audible, just a pulse in the air, a shift in pressure, like the room suddenly remembered what this thing meant. He ran one finger slowly along the lightning bolts, then looked up. Where did you get this? She repeated the same answer, calm, soft. My grandfather gave it to me. He told me to find Catherine Mendes. The man closed the case, not gently, not forcefully, just decisively. You know what this is? Elena hesitated. No, but I know it's real, and I know it wasn't meant to be forgotten. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. There are things in this country, he said, that have no budget lines, no oversight, no entry in the books, built in the cracks of history, meant to never be spoken again. Elena said nothing. Omega, she whispered. He stopped, eyes locked. Where did you hear that? My grandfather said it, she answered. When he handed me the medal, he said, it's from Omega. They'll understand what it means. Barrett watched silently. Her posture had shifted, no longer in charge, now just watching, processing. The man spoke again, softer now. My name is Colonel James Halloran. I used to be part of something no one was supposed to remember. Omega was a Cold War directive, psychological operations. We didn't kill leaders. We rewired them. Fear, narrative, illusion. We learned how to make governments fall without firing a bullet. He paused. And we learned that power like that shouldn't exist in daylight. Elena finally blinked. So what is this? She asked, motioning to the case. A key? More than that, Halloran said. A trigger, a beacon. Each of those metals was forged with embedded protocol sequences, radio frequency signatures, access codes, activation markers for dormant. Networks, 7 were issued, each to a core operative. Most of us believed they were destroyed at decommission. Barrett stepped closer, which makes the fact that you're holding one a very big problem. Elena stayed calm, but her voice caught. Why would he give this to me? I'm nobody. Halloran leaned forward. No, he said. You're the one person who could carry it without triggering every alarm system on the planet. No training record, no clearance trail, no digital shadow. You're not nobody. You're invisible. Elena looked down at her hands. They didn't feel invisible. Barrett's tone softened, just a fraction. Your grandfather's name was Douglas Arthur Brooks, correct? Yes. Did he ever talk about Berlin? She shook her head. Just once, he said. The real war was never what you thought it was. Halloran stood and began to pace. He was more than a radio technician. He was signals and psychological engineering. Tier 4. If he gave you that medal, it means he knew something was waking back up. Barrett crossed her arms, and he sent her to Mendes. That name, again, it hung in the air like a lit fuse. Halloran nodded. Mendes wasn't just a team lead. She built the mental architecture of Omega. She crafted ideological triggers that could last decades, stories, fears, phrases embedded in culture. And when the Cold War ended, she vanished. Presumed dead. Elena asked, presumed dangerous, Barrett corrected. Some say she burned her identity to keep Omega's final protocol from ever being used. Others say she vanished to wait for someone. Elena looked up. Someone like me? Barrett's jaw tightened. If your grandfather gave you that medal and told you to find her, yes, you're the contingency. The room went quiet. Too quiet for a moment. Elena wasn't 17. She was the daughter of something deeper, something buried so long even the architects forgot where the bones were. Halloran turned. We're going to find her, but we do this on our terms. Later that evening, they brought Elena to a secure briefing room. It was different from the first. Not clinical, operational. Satellite images hovered on screens. A tech analyst ran facial reconstruction software on old ID photos. Files were open, not sanitized. They typed in the name. Catherine Mendes. One hit, just one. A woman living outside Colorado Springs under the alias Helen Quartz. Paid everything in cash, no phone, no online presence, no known relatives. Lived in a small cabin outside Cascade, Colorado. A veterans charity received mail under her name. Registered to a foundation with Cold War roots. One that had ties to Omega funding decades ago. She's there. Halloran said. She's been waiting. Barrett turned to Elena. You're going with the team, that if she lets anyone through that door, it'll be you. I don't want protection. Elena said. I want the truth. You might get both. Barrett said. Or neither. They flew out at dawn. Elena was handed a new ID, a burner device, and a coat 2 sizes too big. The black leather case never left her side. She clutched it through security, through transport, through every mile of the winding road into the mountains, somewhere below the clouds. In a cabin wrapped in snow and silence was a woman who hadn't been seen in 30 years, and Elena was the only one she might trust. She sat in the back seat of a black van as it climbed higher into the Colorado Rockies. Barrett drove. Halloran scanned old case files in silence. Wind battered the glass. Pines bent under weight of winter. The GPS had lost signal an hour ago. She's up here? Elena asked if the profile's right, Barrett said. She's smarter than anyone left breathing. At last, they stopped. A clearing, a framed cabin. Sagging under snow, no cars, no tracks. A chimney smoked faintly. No cameras, no alarms. Just a wind chime made of flattened bullet casings. This is it, Barrett opened the door. Stay close. Don't speak unless spoken to. And whatever you do, don't reach for anything. Elena stepped out. The air was sharp. Her boots crunched through snow. The case was under her arm, close like a second heartbeat. They approached the cabin before they could knock. The door opened. A woman stood there, thin, wrapped in wool and denim, silver braid down her chest. Her eyes, bright, unafraid, landed on the case in Elena's arms. You brought it, she said softly. Elena nodded. The woman's gaze moved to Barrett and Halloran, and in a voice that didn't ask, it declared, You two don't belong here. Then, turning to Elena with something almost like recognition, But you do. She stepped aside, holding the door open. For Elena alone. What kind of war leaves no blood, only belief? The warmth of the cabin hit her like a memory. Wood smoke, silence, something old and sacred held in the walls. It didn't smell like safety. It smelled like stories that were never told, Catherine. Mendes didn't smile when Elena entered. She didn't offer tea. She didn't ask if the girl was tired. She simply pointed to the table. Put it there. Elena did. Gently, like it was still hot. The black case sat between them. The latch glinted faintly in the firelight. Mendes didn't open it. She didn't need to. She just stared, not at the case, but at Elena, eyes scanning her the way an architect might study a blueprint. You look like him, she said. Elena said nothing. Mendes slowly lowered herself into the chair across from her. Her movements were deliberate, careful, not from age, but discipline. Even now, after 30 years off-grid, she carried herself like a weapon too dangerous to be left loaded. I thought I'd never see one again, she murmured. Not after Berlin, not after Geneva, not after Mexico City. Elena leaned forward slightly. Her voice, when it came, was steady but soft. What is it really? Mendes didn't answer at first. Instead, she reached behind her and pulled an old photo album from the shelf, one without a cover. She flipped to a page halfway through and laid it open in front of Elena. 7 faces, black and white, labeled. Only with numbers. This was Omega, she said. The real version, not the rumors. Not the case studies they feed to analysts. 7 operatives, 7 keys. She tapped a photograph of a young man with alert eyes and a quiet grin. Douglas Brooks, signal manipulation, interception, acoustic disinformation. He was the best I'd ever seen. Elena's throat tightened. He never told me any of this. He wasn't supposed to. Mendes replied, That was the deal. We vanished. We left nothing behind. No flags, no memoirs. No last words, only the medals. Each one was a fragment of the framework. If the world ever fell too far into chaos, if the systems we'd helped engineer were being twisted against people instead of for them, she looked down at the case. Then the keys would surface, one by one. Elena opened it. The metal rested in its velvet cradle, unmoving, yet heavy with something she still couldn't name. It's already begun, hasn't it? She whispered. Something's waking up. Mendes nodded slowly. Yes, but not by us, not by the originals. Someone else found pieces of what we left behind, pieces we thought were buried. Elena's fingers trembled as they hovered over the metal. And you think I'm supposed to stop it? Mendes leaned back in her chair. The fire crackled. No, she said. I think you're supposed to finish what your grandfather started. They talked for hours. Elena listened. She asked few questions. Most of the answers hurt more than they helped. Omega hadn't been a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It had been a framework, a way of shifting belief systems without bullets. Influenced by design, cultures nudged, movements born from whispers. Conflicts ended before they began, or never ended at all, by choice. Each operative had specialized in a different branch. Language control, media bleed, religious symbology, behavioral economics, algorithmic insertion, and Douglas Brooks, frequency. He understood the world not as noise, Mendes said, but as signal, and when he left Omega, he took his key with him. He buried it in silence, until now. Elena stared at the fire. He didn't want me to have it, she said softly. Not at first. No, Mendes agreed, because he knew what it meant. By midnight, Mendes had shown her the board, a cork wall, dozens of strings, photographs pinned to faces Elena recognized from television, and some she didn't. CEOs, anchors, defense contractors, culture architects, all of them infected, Mendes said. None of them aware. That's the beauty of psychological code. You don't have to install it knowingly. You just have to nudge. Someone's using Omega, Elena whispered. No, Mendes replied. Someone's using its corpse, the shell, the memory of what it was, but not the purpose, not the restraint. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside, coordinates, frequencies, encrypted dossiers, half-legible Morse patterns and Cold War call signs. These are the remnants, the other 6 keys. Some are dead, some disappeared, but at least 2 are still alive, waiting, watching, hoping the signal never comes. Elena took the folder, her fingers stiff. They'll come after me. They already are, Mendes said. At dawn, snow fell again, heavy this time. Blanketing the cabin in silence, Elena stood at the window, wrapped in an old military coat. Mendes joined her, 2 mugs of bitter black coffee in hand. You look tired, the old woman said. I don't think I've slept since the airport. Good, Mendes said. Then you're ready, Elena turned. For what? To decide if truth is still worth protecting. Outside, Barrett and Holleran waited by the van, engines idling. Inside, Catherine Mendes reached for a steel lockbox under the hearth. From it, she pulled an object wrapped in cloth, her own. Metal, tarnished, cracked. I thought I'd never touch it again, she said. But the world's shifting faster than we trained for. Precision is needed now, not control, not chaos, just clarity. She placed her metal on the table beside Elena's. For a moment, the firelight caught both eagles, 2 halves of a design the world forgot to fear. Each one of us carried a line of code, Mendes said. 7 lines, 7 maps. Together, they lead to the archive, the root. Elena blinked. And you want me to find them? No, Mendes said. I want you to reach them, to ask the question we never had the courage to ask, which is, should Omega even exist anymore? That afternoon, they drove her to an isolated airstrip in Pueblo, far from satellites. Far from cities, the plane was small, a vintage Cessna retrofitted with unregistered transceivers and a self-erasing guidance module. The pilot stood waiting. Name's Juno Blackwall, she said, smirking slightly. Don't ask where I'm from. I don't remember. She tossed Elena a set of headphones. I was told this one's special. Elena climbed in. The case sat in her lap around her neck. She wore the metal tag from her grandfather's desk, now a makeshift pendant, a shortwave frequency etched into steel. Juno looked over mid-takeoff. So, she said, what's your mission? Elena looked out the window as the Rockies fell away beneath them. She opened a notebook. The first coordinate was scrawled in her grandfather's handwriting. It led to a town outside Hamburg, Germany, a place called Node 3. Her voice was barely louder than the engine. I'm supposed to find ghosts and ask them if they still believe in the truth. Why would a forgotten power plant need a biometric lock? Elena stood at the fence line just outside Hamburg, Germany, staring through twisted wire and rusted warning signs. Vines coiled around sagging towers. Shattered glass glittered in the snow. The place didn't look like a Cold War relic. It looked like a graveyard for secrets. Her gloved hand tightened around the notebook. Juno had dropped her 5 kilometers out, under cover of darkness. The plane had landed on an unlit strip hours before dawn. No signals, no cell towers. No one was supposed to know she was here, but The silence didn't feel safe. It felt like something was listening. She checked the coordinate again, the one scrawled in her grandfather's strange looping handwriting, embedded between what looked like lines of poetry but weren't. This place wasn't marked on any current maps. Not even the satellite overhead registered a structure here anymore. That's how Omega had always worked. The deception was in the disappearance. She stepped through a hole in the fence, boots crunching over frozen dirt and broken glass. Inside the decaying structure, old lockers stood like tombstones. A spiral staircase dipped into shadow. Graffiti clung to the walls, some angry, some desperate, some symbols she didn't recognize. She moved quickly, down the stairs, past the silence. At the end of a service hallway buried beneath tons of concrete, she found it. A steel hatch, locked, reinforced. A single blinking scanner on its surface. Biometric, aged, but still active. She pulled the metal from beneath her coat. It was colder now. She pressed it to the plate. A soft click. Then the hiss of pressure releasing. The hatch opened. The room beyond smelled like memory. Dry. Preserved. The lights flickered to life, one by one. A slow, breathy hum as power reawakened after decades of dormancy. Consoles lined the circular chamber. Shortwave receivers, data ports, retro-coded processors. Everything analog, everything redundant, because Omega never trusted anything born of satellites. In the center of the room, a pedestal, at its top, a slot. Exactly the shape of the metal's base. Elena approached. She held the metal in both hands, tracing its edge the way her grandfather had, back when she thought he was just fidgeting with old junk. He'd been training her without ever saying so. She placed the metal into the slot. A screen above her flickered, then blinked to life. A single word appeared in green text. Initiate legacy? She hesitated. Her heart pounded so loud it blurred her breath. She typed a single word. Where the screen went black, then the data began to flow. It wasn't just reactivation. It was resurrection. Files decrypted themselves. Lines of code she'd seen. Buried in her grandfather's journals, encrypted signals, call logs, coordinates, frequency maps. And names, so many names, pouring across the screen like a list of souls never counted. Omega hadn't died. It had waited, and it had been listening as she watched. The system showed something else. Recent alerts, pings, attempted signal. Minix. Someone had been trying to fake Omega's reactivation using digital simulations. Someone was trying to impersonate the metal. Whoever they were close. Then a name blinked across the screen in green. Agent Michael Riker. Node to ACIV. Elena froze. She remembered the name. Her grandfather had written it in the margins of the notebook 3 times and underlined it in red. Next to it, a single word. Diverged. She tapped the name. A file opened. It contained blurry photos, partial decryption logs, and a grainy image. Riker, alive, walking through Oslo's central terminal 2 weeks ago. Time-stamped, verified. But his status? Affiliated with Vector Seal. Marasma stared. It didn't feel real. Riker wasn't just alive. He had turned. The man her grandfather once trusted was now part of something else. Something darker. The screen buzzed again. Another message. Note 5. Athens awaiting CONTS. Elena's fingers curled. Another one was still out there. Another original key. She pulled the metal from the console and backed away. The screen faded. Before she reached the hatch, the console buzzed again. One last message appeared. You are not alone. Outside, the air bit hard. Snow had returned. Juno's rental car sat idling near the tree line. Windows fogged. Registration plates already swapped out twice. Elena slammed the door as she jumped in. I'm being followed, she said. Juno didn't blink. I figured. She tossed Elena a burner phone. They pinged your signal twice before I scrambled the uplink. You've got maybe a day's lead. 2, max. Elena clutched the phone in one hand, the metal in the other. He's alive. Juno looked over. Riker? Elena nodded. He's in Oslo, Juno whistled. That's bold. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. And he already knows I'm coming. Across the continent, in a glass tower in Zurich, a man in a slate-gray suit stood before a digital wall shipping tea. The room glowed with embedded screens, silent, elegant. His assistant approached. She found node 3. We're sure it's her? She used the Omega key. Legacy protocol confirmed. The man nodded. Douglas Brooks' legacy has finally come online. What now? He walked across the room, opened a steel cabinet. Inside, a black leather case, identical to Elena's, but the symbol on this one wasn't an eagle. It was a serpent coiled around a torch. Vector. We continue the game, he said. Deploy signal interceptors, scramble node 4, and activate Riker. Elena barely slept that night. They drove for hours, covering ground across snow-choked roads, until they reached a safe house outside Bremen. Inside the rented room, she copied the decrypted files to the drive Mendes had given her, the one line with foil and analog shielding. It still didn't feel like enough. Everything she touched, every piece of this puzzle, only opened a darker door. The metal, the notebook, the whisper of truth her grandfather left buried in her bones. She stood at the window and looked at the frost. She whispered the line again, the one she'd found scribbled in fading ink, written beneath a map of Berlin. In the dark, truth isn't found, it's protected. And now, a 17-year-old girl with no military record and no training was the only firewall left between the world and the people trying to control its mind. She wasn't a spy, she wasn't a soldier, but someone, somewhere, had built her for this, without her even knowing. He opened the door before she knocked. Elena stood frozen in the service hallway of an Oslo tech hub, a cold wind sliding in behind her from the alley she'd crept through. Her fingers tightened around the black case beneath her coat. Her breath fogged a stale air, and he was just there. Michael Riker, older than his file photo, but unmistakable. White hair slicked back, trench coat tailored and pressed. He looked like he hadn't aged. He'd hardened. His eyes didn't flinch. Neither did hers. I expected you sooner, he said, stepping aside. I expected you to be harder to find. Elena replied. He gestured inside. You came alone, good. The hallway behind him was narrow, sterile, filled with antique gear and servers that hummed like machines trying to forget their purpose. As they walked, the concrete seemed to hum under her feet, alive with signals and secrets. She didn't speak. She watched everything. You've got your grandfather's stare, Riker said eventually. He was one of the few people I ever trusted to hold the line. She stopped walking. He thought you were dead. I was supposed to be, he replied. They reached a private server room buried under the facility. No windows, no cameras. A door that locked behind them with a soft click. Riker turned to face her. You brought it, he said. You already knew that, Elena replied. I felt the network wake up. You reactivated node 3. She opened her coat, just enough to show the metal inside the case. His eyes didn't widen, but something behind them flickered. Pain, regret, resignation. I helped design that, he said. It was supposed to be our failsafe, our firewall against chaos. Then we buried it. She pulled it fully from her coat and held it in both hands. And yet, you're still here. Riker stepped forward, slowly, and opened a panel on the wall. Inside it sat another metal, identical in shape, but scorched at the edges. The bronze blackened as if it had been burned. His. I was the one tasked with shutting it all down, he said. I was the last signal, if Omega ever outlived its purpose. I was supposed to kill it. Elena didn't speak. Her voice felt trapped somewhere between her ribs and her heart. But something happened. Riker continued. Vector found us. They didn't start from scratch. They started with us rebuilt. Omega's bones replaced its soul. He gestured to the room around them. Now it's a doctrine. A digital empire. You're part of it. she whispered. I tried to dismantle it from the inside, he said. Failed. Elena stepped back, not far, but enough. I don't know who to believe. She said. That's the point, Riker replied. When truth becomes fragmented, whoever controls the narrative wins. He walked to a console, typed in a command. A secure drawer opened. Inside, a drive. This has everything, he said. Embedded agents, fabricated news cycles, algorithm loops designed to polarize, political implants, network intercepts. What you've been seeing in the world, it's not chaos. It's precision, controlled by people who want to make obedience feel like choice. She stared at it and said nothing. For years, I waited for someone like you, he said. I knew. Douglas would never let the metal stay buried forever. He had that old-world dignity, and he had you. Elena's hand shook as she reached for the drive, but she didn't take it yet. What am I supposed to do with this? Riker's answer came fast. Leak it. And then what? She asked. Collapse the world? No, he said. Expose the illusion. Rip out the wires and show them they were puppets. Her voice turned sharp. You want me to become Omega? Riker exhaled. No, he said softly. I want you to choose whether Omega should even exist anymore. She finally picked up the drive, and then the sirens wailed. Red lights spun in the hallway. Riker moved like a man who'd rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times. He shoved a burner phone into her coat. Secure channel. End to end. Use only if extraction fails. What's happening? They found us. Who? Vector, he said. Or whatever part of it still answers to the ones I tried to burn down. He opened the maintenance hatch behind the servers. Cold air poured through. Snow dusted the floor beyond. There's a private landing pad on the fjord, he said. Juno's already in the air. She'll find you. What about you? He smiled grimly. I was always the decoy. You're the signal. Elena hesitated. Her instinct told her to stay, to fight, to drag him with her. But something in his eyes stopped her. There was no redemption there, only sacrifice. She ran 40. Minutes later, soaked with cold rain and shaking from adrenaline, Elena reached the edge of the Oslo fjord. Juno's plane hovered low over a snow-dusted cliff. She sprinted across the landing pad as the plane door slid open. Juno reached down, pulling her up with one arm and slamming the hatch closed behind her. Did you get it? She shouted over the roar. Elena didn't answer right away. She held up the drive, then, softer. I got more than that. They rose into the clouds, back of the tech hub. Riker stood calmly in the server room. He disabled the fire suppression systems. He'd already scrubbed the logs. As footsteps approached from the hallway, he took one last breath and whispered something no one else would ever hear. I'm sorry, Douglas. I couldn't stop it. In the sky. Elena opened her grandfather's notebook. One last time there, on the final page. A line she hadn't noticed before, barely visible, but now glowing faintly in the low cabin light. In the dark. Truth isn't found, it's protected. She closed the book and looked out the window below her. Nations turned beneath a false calm. Leaders lied with clean smiles. Networks whispered fear in perfect syntax, and someone, somewhere, had started to play God with stories. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know who would come after her. She didn't even know if she'd survive the year. But she knew one thing. They had emptied her backpack. They had found the metal that shouldn't exist, and now they had to face the girl they never saw coming. How do you fight a war no one will admit is happening? The plane touched down just after midnight in a quiet airstrip somewhere near Prague. Elena barely spoke as she stepped off, the wind slapping her cheeks, the black case in her hands like a tether to a version of herself she hadn't been 2 weeks ago. Juno stayed silent too. No need for words now. They were in it, and it wasn't over. Inside the small hangar, Barrett was waiting. Arms folded, coat button tight, her expression unreadable. You made it, she said flatly. I wasn't supposed to. Elena replied. She held up the drive. Barrett's eyes flickered. Surprise, relief, maybe even guilt. You went to Oslo? I found Riker. Barrett stepped forward. Is he gone? Elena said. But not before giving me this. Barrett took the drive like it might burn her hand. Then Elena added, softly, he never stopped fighting. Barrett nodded. Slowly. Neither did your grandfather. They didn't talk more. Not here. Not now. The ride back was quiet. But Elena could feel it. The pulse under the surface. Like the entire world was one shallow breath from unraveling. She thought about the notebook. The next name. The next node, Athens, node 5. Another original key. Waiting or dead or compromised, she didn't know which scared her more back in Colorado Springs. They gave her a room in a decommissioned NORAD. Outpost deep in the mountains, quiet and sterile. The walls didn't echo. The lights didn't hum. It was like the place had been designed for people who didn't want to remember anything at all. She couldn't sleep. The metal sat on the desk, next to her grandfather's notebook. The case open, the velvet catching firelight like a shrine. For a while, she just stared at it. The girl who had boarded a one-way flight with nothing but a backpack was gone. In her place was someone who had seen the network under the world, who had walked through abandoned war rooms and talked to ghosts that still knew how to kill. She didn't know what she was yet, but she knew what she wasn't. She wasn't going back. The next morning, Catherine Mendes arrived. No warning. No detail, just a black SUV. A door opened, and the woman stepping out wrapped in that same long braid and hollow stare. Inside the conference room, she placed something in front of Elena. A green envelope, old, olive drab, marked. Omega Archive Classified Level 0. Mendes didn't sit. You're not just here to deliver messages, she said. You're here to become one. Elena opened the envelope slowly. Inside, 7 cards, thin, etched with numbers and ciphered code, each one aligned with a geographic coordinate and a frequency, shortwave signals, mesh servers, dead drop endpoints. This was our dead man switch, Mendes said. If the metals were ever activated, these points would come online, each one tied to one of us. Elena picked up the first card, Athens. The others? Scattered across the world. Chile, Tunisia, Vietnam, Quebec, one marked only as unknown. You want me to reactivate Omega? She asked. No, Mendes said softly. I want you to reassemble it, so it can choose whether it should exist anymore. Elena's throat tightened. That's a lot for a 17-year-old. That's why you're perfect, Mendes said. You're not corrupted by the mission. You don't want power. And you're smart enough to be terrified. Elena stared down at the cards. This wasn't a plan. It was a test. A test of faith, of restraint, of legacy. Who else knows? No one, Mendes replied. Not even Barrett Holleran suspects, but he's not cleared. Why trust me with this? Because your grandfather did, and because he taught you the cipher before you ever knew you'd need it. That night, Elena took the notebook and walked outside. The sky above the Rockies stretched endless. No lights, no sound. She sat on the cold concrete floor near the edge of the old radar tower and opened to a page she hadn't read yet. Her grandfather's writing, crisp and small. They told us silence would keep people safe. But silence is a cage, not a shield. One day, someone will need to break the seal. If you're reading this, you're that someone. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she cried. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood the price of what he'd given her and what it would cost to carry it forward. The next morning, Barrett entered the room while Elena was zipping her backpack. You're not cleared for another op, she said. I'm not asking. Barrett stared at her, then sighed. You going to Athens? Yes. Barrett didn't argue. Instead, she handed her a case. Inside, A military-grade encrypted transceiver, rugged, small, offline capable, old school. Use this only if everything goes sideways, she said. Otherwise, no signals. No. Leaks. Elena nodded. Halloran met her at the airstrip. He didn't give a speech, didn't ask questions. He just handed her a forged passport, shook her hand, and said, "Keep moving." She climbed into the plane. Juno was waiting. As they lifted off, Elena looked down at the mountain range below, sharp, vast and unmoved. The case in her lap, the cards in her pocket, and somewhere ahead, another operative, another link in the chain, another person who had once been trained to tear down entire governments using only belief. She didn't know who they were now, but she was going to find out, and if they were twisted by Vector, she'd do what Riker couldn't. She'd end it, even if it meant ending Omega itself. Halfway to Athens, Juno looked over. "You still sure about this?" "No," Elena said, "but I'm going anyway." "Fair enough." They flew in silence. For hours, the sky turning from copper to black, Elena stared at the first card, Node 5. Coordinates led to a collapsed train station on the edge of the old city, buried beneath centuries of brick and dust. A grandfather had written something beside it in the notebook. Not everyone who vanished was running away, some just knew where to wait. She folded the page shut and waited for the storm she could feel coming, because this wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about who deserved to shape the future and who had stolen that right without ever asking. She didn't know the name of the man watching her, but she knew he was watching. From the moment she stepped off the tram in Athens, wrapped in a hoodie, her case slung across her back, she felt it, the rhythm of footsteps just a second. Too steady, the same reflection in too many windows. A shadow that lingered half a breath too long. She'd read about paranoia. This wasn't that. This was survival. She kept walking, down into the tunnels. The old metro station hadn't been used in decades. Signs in cracked Greek, paint peeling from the ceiling. Rats scattered in the dark, but deep beneath the surface, buried behind collapsed masonry and a rusted maintenance door, was something else. A signal, Node 5. The coordinates led her to a hatch built into the wall behind an electrical panel. She peeled it open with a crowbar she'd bought in cash 2 cities ago. Inside, wires, dust, and an old biometric pad. She held up the metal. The scanner blinked green. She held her breath and turned the handle. The space beneath the station wasn't large, maybe 2 rooms. One had a cot, a lantern, old supplies. The other held a table covered in paper maps, redacted documents, photographs. A radio buzzed quietly in the corner, dialed to a long dead shortwave frequency. At the far end of the table, someone sat waiting. Female. Gray hair pulled into a tight braid. Thin frame, wrapped in a wool sweater that looked handmade. She looked up when Elena entered, not startled, expecting. "You're late," she said. Elena stepped forward cautiously. "You're?" "Operative 5, the woman said. "Call me Elena." That name hadn't appeared on any of the Omega records, which meant she had erased herself long before the collapse. Elena placed the medal on the table. Elena didn't reach for it. She only studied it, then looked up. "So, he sent you," Elena nodded. "My grandfather, Douglas Brooks." Elena exhaled through her nose. Not in relief, more like confirmation. "He was the last one I trusted to tell the truth." Elena sat down. Across from her, "What happened to the rest of you?" "Scattered, silenced. Some turned. Some simply stopped believing." "And you?" "I went to ground," she said. "The moment I heard Mendes had disappeared, I knew it was only a matter of time, so I ran. Took my note offline, changed names, changed faces, waited." Elena looked at the documents spread before her, read. Circles on maps, transcripts of intercepted calls, lists of politicians, broadcasters, influencers. "You've been tracking them," Elena said. "Vector?" Ilana replied, "Yes, or whatever they call themselves now." It doesn't matter. The name changes. The method doesn't. They took what we built and stripped out the ethics. They don't persuade. They overwrite. Elena pointed to one of the photos. A man in a suit exiting a building in Brussels. He's in government now, Elena nodded. And he once trained under Riker, Elena's breath caught. Elena looked at her carefully. You met him? Yes. Elena didn't ask what happened. She already knew. You're not ready. Elena said after a pause. Elena's jaw clenched. I found Node 3. I reached Riker. I survived Zurich's surveillance teams. How am I not ready? Because you still believe this ends with truth, Elena said. Voice soft but firm. It doesn't. It ends with choices. Bad ones. I'm not here to make war. You're already in one. Elena stood, voice rising. Then tell me. What to do? Elena stood too. Slowly. Truth is a weapon now, child, and you're holding it. The question is, will you use it to wound or to warn? They stared at each other. Old soldier, young signal. Elena walked to the back wall and pulled down a box. Inside, a duplicate medal, her own. Untouched since 1992, she set it beside Elena's. 2 down, she said. 3 more confirmed. Dead, 1 turned. Elena nodded. And 1 unknown. Elena's gaze sharpened. Unknown scares me more than compromised, because it means they were good enough to hide from everyone. Even us. She handed Elena a sealed envelope. Coordinates, next target. Tunisia. Node 6. No known alias. No digital trace. Before you go, Elena added, there's something you should see. She walked to the radio panel and flipped a hidden switch. A screen above the desk blinked to life. Static. Then a face. Barrett. Grainy. Encrypted. A live feed. Pulled from a buried channel. She doesn't know I'm watching her, Elena said. But she's moving. Quiet meetings. Files. Being pulled from old Pentagon vaults. Elena watched the feed in silence. You think she's been compromised? She asked. Elena didn't answer directly. I think everyone has a limit, she said. And hers may be coming. By the next day, Elena was gone. No cell, no trail, just a forged passport, a new identity, and a heart that felt like it had stopped. Trusting gravity, Juno met her at the safe point outside the Aegean coast. This time, the plane was smaller, faster. Where to now? Juno asked as they took off. Elena held the envelope tightly. North Africa. You're bleeding into the cracks now, kid, Juno said. The world doesn't even know you exist anymore. Elena looked out the window. Good. The sky above was clear. The sea below was black. Somewhere on the other side of that darkness was the next node, the next face, the next test of whether Omega's last signal could still mean something. Elena closed her eyes and whispered, Don't let them see you coming. Back in Athens, Elena dismantled the radio. She burned the maps. She fed her own metal to the furnace, not out of betrayal, but because her part was done. She was the echo. Elena was the voice. Somewhere across the sea, the torch was being passed again, and soon. They would all know Omega wasn't dead. It was listening. How do you end something that was never supposed to begin? The desert wind tore across the dunes outside Tataouine, Tunisia. Elena moved quickly, head low, wrapped in an old shawl. Dust rose like ghosts behind her boots, her black case tight against her side. She'd followed the car to this place, a small, cracked structure buried into a rock wall. It looked abandoned. That's why it felt perfect. Node 6, she knocked, twice, waited, then again. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. Omega's old code. The door opened a crack, a voice, low and hoarse. Who sent you? Elena showed the metal. The door opened inside. It smelled of copper, sand, and something older, like time had settled into the corners. A single oil lamp flickered on a desk, and beside it, a woman, tall, thin, wrapped in desert robes, dark, skin weathered by years of sun, Her eyes glowed with recognition. "I thought I was the last," she said. "You're not," Elena replied. The woman stepped forward. She didn't offer a name. Just, "I was Note 6 once." They didn't talk much, not right away. Instead, Elena placed her case on the desk, opened it, and took out the drive. Then the medal, then the notebook. She laid it all out like pieces of a ritual. Not technology, not tools, memory. The woman watched in silence, then slowly reached beneath her robe and pulled out something Elena hadn't expected. A second notebook. Older, crumpled, familiar in shape, language, and ink. My mentor was one of the founders. The woman said, "He vanished before I could ask why, but he left me this, and I waited. I didn't know what for." Until now, Elena opened the notebook inside. Frequency logs, ciphered phrases, coordinates, and a line at the bottom, in the same ink as her grandfather's last entry. "If you're reading this, she found you." Elena didn't speak. Her throat closed. Her hands trembled. The woman reached out, not to comfort, but to honor. "You were never meant to fight this war," she said. "But I'm already in it," Elena replied. "And you'll win," the woman said softly, "because you still feel it." That night, they sat beneath the stars outside the hideout, maps spread between them. There was only one node left. Unknown. The card held no location, no code, no clue, just a blank field. And a strange symbol. 3 intersecting rings. Elena showed it to the woman. She stiffened. "I've seen this." "Where?" The woman took a piece of charcoal and drew in the sand. A symbol, a building, a compound buried deep in Siberia. A place erased from records after 1986. "It was called the listening place," the woman said. "But we called it the mirror, because nothing inside it ever gave answers, only reflections." Elena leaned in, her voice low. "Was someone left behind?" "Not left," the woman said. "Buried." A week later, Elena stood at the edge of a forest where no GPS signal worked. She had traveled by train, foot, and smuggler. No passport, no network, just silence. Ahead, buried beneath the trees and cold wind, stood a facility with no lights, no name, and no open door. But her grandfather had written of it, the Omega Origin Point, where the program had first been dreamed, not as a weapon, but as a memory vault. A system meant to preserve truth before the world could rewrite it, the final node. And the one thing Vector never found. She pressed her palm against a rusted panel by the door. No code, just a whisper of static then. A voice, hers, played back through a system that should have died before she was born. "Hello?" She had said once on a shortwave channel, back in Germany. The system had recorded it, matched it, then opened. The door creaked. Elena stepped inside. It was nothing like the others. No gear, no radios. Just a chamber lined in reflective panels, a ring of old monitors, one single chair in the center. Dust lay thick over everything. Undisturbed, she walked forward, sat, and as she did, the monitors flickered, each one lit with images of herself. Not photographs, but live feeds from airports, streets, checkpoints. Someone had been watching her for a long time. Then a final monitor lit, and the face that appeared there wasn't unknown. It was her grandfather, recorded, grainy, alive only in pixels and signal. "If you've come here," the message began, "then you've passed every test I left behind, and I'm sorry for that. Truly, you didn't deserve to carry this. But you were the only one who could without being consumed." He paused, looked down, then back up. Amigo was never meant to live this long. It was a contingency, a firewall. But when the world started burning lies into truth, I realized something. We didn't need more soldiers. We needed memory. People who wouldn't just fight back, but remember what we were supposed to be fighting for. Elena listened, breath caught in her chest. "That's why I trained you without your knowing. That's why I wrote everything in riddles. Because if they ever found out too early, They'd take you, twist you, just like they did to Riker. The monitor flickered. His voice softened. So here's your last order, Elena, and it's not to fight. He looked straight into her eyes, even across time. It's to choose. You can press that switch behind the chair. It'll send every file, every archive, every message vector ever intercepted. You'll expose them, destroy their system, but you'll also collapse the networks built on top of it, the lies. And the truths. You won't be a hero. You'll be a reset. Elena reached behind the chair, felt the switch, a small, cold metal toggle. Her heartbeat pounded. Her grandfather's final words echoed. Or, you can walk away, carry it instead. Protect what matters. Let them rot in their arrogance. Wait, watch, and be the firewall they never saw coming. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The screen went black. And Elena was alone. She sat there for hours. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she understood exactly what either choice would mean. There was no glory left, no victory, only memory, responsibility, and a future built on a decision no one would ever know she made. In the end, she stood, took the medal, closed the case, and walked out without pressing the switch. Months passed, the world spun on. Elena never reappeared in headlines. No leaks, no explosions, but things began to change. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned to investigations. Networks collapsed quietly. Influence campaigns dried up. People stepped down from power. Not because Omega struck, but because it was watching. And someone was walking among them with memory sharp as a knife. And silence sharper than any war. They emptied her backpack. They found a medal that wasn't supposed to exist, and they never understood that the most dangerous thing they awakened wasn't Omega, it was the girl holding it.